So today I'm going to show you guys how to make a nut for a guitar. First thing to do is to make sure you've got the nut seated correctly. And what I like to do is use these StuMac files with the file only on one edge, not on the side edges. And essentially you file down until you get the nut seated properly where it sits correctly. And then from there you make sure that you've got enough room so that the nut actually sits within its slot. So when you're doing your glue ups of the fretboard and the headstock, that you've got the proper fitting. So you'll want to sand on either side to make sure that you've got the nut seated properly, not only on the bottom but on the sides as well. So you may have to do some filing along your headstock, not on the fretboard side but on the headstock side, to make sure it sits correctly. And then from there what I like to do is take a flat tip pencil. So this is a super pencil. It's the next generation of the carpenter pencil, whatever. And what I did is I sanded down just on one side to get it flat, so that I take this pencil, lay it on the fretboard to get the top of the fret height, and I take it and I draw my line of where the fret heights are. So I go back and forth and I cut it here. So now I know how far I need to sand down on my belt sander. So I'll cut this here and I'll sand down, and what I'll do is I'll leave just enough of a height for the string to sit through. So if I got a nut already, I want to leave probably like another 1/16 of an inch above this line, so I can actually do the take the StuMac nut files and actually do the filing. So now what I'll do is I'll cut this edge off, again leave just a little bit of a height above the line, and then I'll use my handy StuMac string spacing rule, and I'll go ahead and mark the nut, and then I'll start filing away. Well, there's nothing like the smell of fresh bone in the morning. So what I've done now is I've sanded on the belt sander just above the line, so I have some room for the fret slots, and then I've got the cutoff piece right there. You can't really see it. And the nut fits about perfectly. There's a little bit on the edge that I'll probably trim off with a file. But the next step then is to take your trusty clamp and to clamp down the nut in the clamp and figure out how you want to line up the frets. So either you can use, like I said, the string spacing rule and go ahead and mark how you want to do this, or what I like to do, since I do so many Les Paul type guitars, is I already have a nut set up, and what I'll do is get this lined up and take my pencils and then just mark the center of each string, and I'll clamp that down, then I'll begin to file depending on what size I'll do. So go ahead and mark on with the pencil. So now that I've got the lines drawn up, what I did is I made sure I got a really nice fine tip pencil and drew the lines. You have some choices to make on what size you want to use for your nut. So for me, I'll start with a 0.5 and I'll work my way down on the nut. And essentially the way I file these down is I make sure I've got the right size on the file. I mark them because they're kind of hard to see. And what I like to do is I like to start in the back where I've marked it and then pull it forward and go down at an angle. That way I'm not taking too much off the front end. So the biggest thing with the nut is to make sure that you've got enough room to make adjustments. So if you file too far on the first pass, you've really got to start on a new nut. So what I like to do is go on the back and cut the file from the back and pull it forward slowly. And really the finishing piece with a nut is actually finishing it when you've got it set in the guitar. I'm not an expert person in doing nuts in the sense that I've probably done maybe 30 or 40, but I still like to get it on the guitar, glued on, and then do the final passes to get it perfectly. Once you start marking down, you know, the trick is you push down at the 3rd fret and you see how much you have between the first fret and the nut. So as you push down, you want it to get as close as possible, but you don't want it to touch. So really that finesse is done on the guitar neck, not here. So you go through, pull through, go through with the different size files to the different types of string sizes that you'll be using. Glue it in. Before you glue it in, I'll sand the back of this down so I get a curved nut on the back side, glue it in, and then from there do the finesse piece. Like I said, I've got my nut preliminary cut because I don't want to touch the line. I just want to get as close as possible without touching, and there's a final fit that needs to be done. But what I'll do now is I'll rough over the edges here so I don't have a hard edge on either of these sides, and what I'll do is I'll take this to my belt sander and essentially I'll just sand off the back edge here so that the nut slides through a little bit easier than if I left these hard edges. So on a Strat you'll see they have a hard edge, but on a Les Paul type of guitar the string comes up like this. So what you want to do is you want to sand the edge off so that the nut slides through as you're adjusting it, and there's not a whole lot of string pull. What happens is the nut can bind the string as you're tuning it. Then you don't get a perfect tune. You'll either be tightening it or loosening it too much. So by sanding off the back edge here, you allow the string to pass through a little bit easier. So here's the nut before the final fitting. I've sanded down the edges here to get it flush perfectly, and I've got the nut and I sanded off the back side here to get the strings to pass through properly. Process for finishing the guitar nut is you take your finger at the 3rd fret, push down to see what the gap is. You don't want the string wire to actually touch the 1st fret. You just want it to be slightly above it. So you push this down, go back and file your nut till you've got the proper adjustment. The big thing about the guitar is you got to make sure it's sat for a while and that the neck is adjusted to the tension of the strings. Then you make your truss rod adjustment, then you go ahead and finish the nut. You don't want to do it in reverse order, because if you do the nut, finish the nut before the guitar is adjusted, it could potentially fret out.